the prerequisite is you've got to love sound. And so everybody that in Rev Rooms, including the coders, are either musicians or DJs or producers or something about it, something about their their private life, which is sort of steeped in sound as well. So you've got to love it, and that's why they sort of bring that that attitude into the work they do with us.
Welcome to another episode of GameLogic Behind the Games. Chuffed to be able to welcome Gav Shepherd onto the pod today. How are you, Gav?
Very well. Nice to see you, Mike.
Excellent to see you. I don't think I've seen you since GDC. I imagine you've been very, very busy since then, judging by some of the conversations we've had. Yeah,
it's been great. It's been a month since then, really. It was a good week in San Francisco. As you know, we went out for a basketball game one night, and we were seeing you at various parties and stuff. So, yeah, things have been busy since then. Thanks.
Fantastic. So for those that don't know, Gav is the co-CEO of Rev Rooms, a co-dev firm focused on audio. I'll let you discuss that in a bit more detail for us shortly, Gav, if that's all right. But before we start, I've just got to mention I'm not on my normal GameLogic attire. It's homage to my beloved Pompey, who won the league Tuesday night. So we're 18th of April today. They became champions Tuesday. So I feel like I've got to represent for a few days. I hope that's all right, Gav.
I'll let you get away with it. I'll let it slide just this once because as a Brighton fan, years ago, we were kind of one of the big rivals. And I think I've been to Fratton Park 3 or 4 times and I've only ever seen defeats for Brighton. So yeah, looking at your badge, I mean, listen, it's a pretty amazing journey, and I really loved League One, League Two football, because Brighton, most of my life, were playing in those leagues, and I missed the sort of 3,000 or 4,000 capacity games, with proper old Victorian grounds and stuff. I mean, can't knock where Brighton have got to in the Premier League, but it has been, I understand what it's like, being in those divisions, and how amazing it is getting promoted.
Unbelievable. I mean, I won't talk about it too much because I'm sure there's a lot of people tuning in that didn't want to hear me talk about football and Pompey. But being able to see us win a league title on the pitch with my little girl, I was with the guys that took me to my first ever Pompey game some 25 years ago. Just amazing for the whole city. So yeah, for 1 week only, I'm wearing all Pompey kit and back to normality next pod.
No, I mean, I remember when Brighton were 92nd in the league out of 92 clubs, and then to get to a point where we were 6th at one point in this season is a pretty amazing journey. And it shows you what's possible, really. Absolutely. Does.
Well, up the Southerners.
Yep.
So, Gav, as we always do with these pods, would love to hear about your journey. So if you don't mind, talk us through it, talk us through the various different roles you've worked your way through up to the current position with Rev Rooms.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a long one because I'm older than most people in the video game industry, to be honest.
You're in your 20s now, aren't you?
And I've been around. Yeah, I mean, I'm 52 now, and I've been in. I've been working in sound as a professional since I was 18, and there weren't really the routes into the industry through education that there are now. I mean, some of the guys at Rev Rooms that we hire have got, undergraduate degrees and then an MA in game audio design, or for the coders, they got computer science degrees and masters. Gwen's even got a PhD in astrophysics, for God's sake. So, I mean, I'm extremely underqualified from an early age. But I knew I've had a real piece of luck when I was about 14 and I was in my first band, and one of my dad's friends, who's a left-handed guitar player, and I'm a left-handed guitar player as well. He runs a studio in Brighton, and he was looking for session players. I said, okay, I'll come and help you out. And I said, look, okay, why don't we do a deal and you can give me free studio time and teach me how to use the gear, the mixing desk and the recorders, and I'll give you free, guitar and bass for your sessions. And so what I realized at 14 was that I wanted to be a sound engineer in recording studios. And that's unusual for people at that age to find the thing they want to do and then find, 38 years later that they're still doing it. When my kids were at that point when they were deciding whether to go to university or not, they both said, well, look, hold on, you didn't do this. You didn't go to uni and do this stuff. And I said, well, look, I got very lucky in I knew what I wanted. I knew the direction I was going. And there weren't the courses. SAE didn't exist, which is the School of Audio Engineering. Gateway was the only one that did exist, and they were quite pricey. degrees. And so I left school at 16, and did a couple of menial jobs for a couple of years. And then my dad, who'd worked at Amex in the 70s, which was in Brighton, that's the big employer. Worked in the training department. Anyway, he'd spun up his own interactive e-learning, as it's now known, company, and I ended up getting a job there. So £8,000 a year, and I was working on pre-Pro Tools. So for anybody that's a sound person, they'll know that that's one of the sort of the main bits of software there. Editing voiceover for training videos, and so 18 years old, and by about 4 years from that point, then so I must have been 22 by then. The company had moved into video games, and they were designing and producing and then releasing a couple of games, and so. Me and a couple of other guys, Paul, James and Lee Nicklin, was the sound team on that. Paul's still working with us now, over 30 years later. And so there were a couple of games that were released. So one of them was The Drowned God, which was a really out there conspiracy theory based point and click CD-ROM game. The sound was all mono. It's all very, very compressed and bit crushed, and very difficult to understand. And how it was, but it was quite cutting edge at the time. And so I did that for a couple of years. The game came out, and I think it came out the same week as Myst. And it then, kind of disappeared for a bit, but it's a bit of a cult classic for anybody that knows it. And then, so Paul and I set up a company called the Audio House at that point. So 1997, we left Epic, they were called, and we moved up to London and set up a studio called the Audio House, doing music for TV generally. But we were also doing interactive media, sort of sound installation stuff. There was Shockwave Flash was kind of brand new, and there were people that we knew that were doing websites that were looking for interactive audio design. So we were still keeping our hand in that stuff, but generally it was music for commercials and TV. And then again, by being in the right place at the right time, the company got bought. So we were bought by this company called Razorfish, which was one of the big web design conglomerates at the time in the .com boom of the late 90s. And then we ended up doing that for a couple of years. And then I think it was the day my daughter was about to be born, they made us all redundant, and ended up, so moved out of London, back to Brighton, and actually spent an amazing year with my daughter, not having to work. They paid us off quite nicely, and so had that time you're never going to get back again. But although by the time my son was born, I was back in work and working quite long hours. What happened is I went off work for Disney for 3 years. Had a fantastic time working within the Disney Character Voices International department. So that's the first time I really encountered dubbing. So in games it's just known as localization or loc. But it was introduced me to this idea that everything, all the content is dubbed into up to 45 languages, and I was working in this sort of TV dubbing department there at Disney in Hammersmith, and then moved to Pinewood Studios and in 2005, and as a sort of junior re-recording mixer for features, and that was working on the Disney account. So Shepperton particularly, which is part of the Pinewood group, had a division there which made all of the dubs for Disney feature animation. And so when I got there, we were doing a lot of sequels and things like this, but also there were the big tentpole movies, like at the time, I think it was Treasure Planet was Disney's one, which came out at the same time as Harry Potter and bombed, unfortunately. But then we were also doing all of the Pixar stuff as well. So I think the first one I really got involved in from a mix point of view was The Incredibles. And then all of the
cool film.
Yeah, man, absolutely. It's still one of my favorites, even now. That and Cars and some of those real Pixar at their peak. Up, Wall-E, all, and so that was dubbing everything into. I think that the reach for languages on those movies was about 44. And so there was 4 or 5 of us mixing. So you'd take 5 or 6 of the languages, and as I kind of rose up the ranks, I would get to do the bigger languages, which was the European ones and the Japanese. And I had a lot of fun doing that for 15 years, I think, pretty much. I was there, and then I was kind of, there are various points in your career where there's a window of opportunity opens, and you think, am I going to go for this, or am I just going to stay doing what I'm doing? And Pinewood Shepperton is a pretty prestigious place to work in the film industry, but the hours were very long. I'd missed quite a few kids' birthdays in my in the years I was working there. We were always pretty busy over Easter, which is when my kids' birthdays are. We had big Christmas movies. There was always the big Marvel movies and then the Lucasfilm movies in the later years there. So it was a lot to, I got to my mid-40s by that point and was just trying to work out whether that's something I wanted to carry on doing. And those sort of phenomenal, great movies, but a lot of commitment to being there, in the dark in these enormous mix rooms, which were great fun. But anyway, so I had this opportunity to go back into games, kind of like almost 30 years later in Brighton as well. So Jay Green, who's the art director at Electric Square, I knew him. I'd seen him in a pub about sort of 10 years ago from now, actually. And we sort of talked about what he was doing in games. And I'd been out of the loop for 20 years on that stuff. And he was asking how I was doing, working on the sort of movies I was in localization. And he said, well, if there's ever any point to get you come work back in games, I'll give you a shout. And he did. So anyway, what happened was I interviewed for Electric Square. I didn't know anything about games in terms of the current tech, and I went off and did an Fmod in a weekend. So Fmod is one of the audio middleware packages which the audio designers use in games, and that along with Wise. Anyway, there was an Fmod in a weekend course, so I did that and passed it, or I think that did the exam on this, and so took that to Electric Square to the interview and said, look, okay, I've done some training, here we go, and they hired me. I had no idea what I was doing, other than I knew how to deliver things, I knew how to get things done with sound, how to make things sound good. And it turned out on my first day, and Andy Gibson was there, and who's the co-founder of Rev Rooms with me, and he was the guy that had done he designed the Fmod in a weekend course. So I was like, oh, you're the guy that I did the course with. And so, he was pretty, he had to say that, well, this guy must be good if he's done my course, right? So, so I had a good laugh about that. And then we got to meet Gwen. So Gwen was working in code, not audio code at the time, but on a particular game that was going on at Electric Square. And what really amazed me about the studio there was that I'd come from quite a, the culture in movies where I was very different from games. The games seemed to be really collaborative, very relaxed. People were much younger. I was definitely the oldest guy at the Electric Square by that point. And also people weren't really trading on past reputations at all. I mean, I think that I remember getting there and people would say, oh, well, what job have you come from before? And they're quite interested and they go, oh, wow, you just worked on Black Panther or whatever it was. That's cool. But then that reputation lasts like seconds, and then it's really like, well, what do you do now? What can you offer this game? And that was pretty humbling and exactly what I needed. What I was looking for was creative and technical challenges, to meet new people, to learn new things. And then so really we did this for a couple of years. Andy and I kind of hatched a plot to form a company. And we roped in Gwen. So between the three of us, Andy's kind of steeped in game audio for the last 20 years. Gwen is a fantastic audio coder and astrophysicist and an amazing folk guitarist as well. So we thought between the three of us, we had an interesting enough background and variety of skills, if you like, to make a real go of something. And that's the sort of the long route back to games and to where Rev Rooms is now.
That's an awesome story. I'm going to have to be selective with my questions because I've got loads here, but a couple of things that there are so many overlaps with, and there's so many points of reference from what you've gone through there. Like, so a couple of little ones like Pinewood being at Shepperton is like 5 minutes from here, and I'll go swimming at Shepperton Lake and do my open water swimming there. When you were at Disney, they were owned by the Eisner family, who now own Portsmouth Football Club, who were on the pitch on Tuesday night. It's just there's so many overlaps. But what I love, and one of the things I love about our industry, and you mentioned it really, really early on. You recognised really early what you wanted to do, and you're able to still do that some 30 odd years later, which is amazing. And I did want to ask you, Gav, on that actually. You clearly very passionate about audio and music early on. When was it that you realised you wanted to do that in gaming? Was that prevalent at the time? Were you a gaming fan and an audio fan, or did that come later?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a casual gamer, really. I mean, my folks, when I was a teenager, had the SNES, and they were all Mario mad. And so in fact, all four of us in the family played it every day. So we have a little chart on the fridge saying when people were allowed to play it. Like my dad was like 5 till 6, I was 6 till 7. So that was, so we were all really into that sort of stuff. But because my dad had worked at Amex in the 70s, he had, Commodore computers at home, we had a BBC computer at home, and then we had an Apple, the original Apple computer as well, and there were games on there, so we would play whatever it was. I think it was Apple Galaxian, which was Apple's version of Space Invaders. So all of that stuff was was something I was really interested in. And as I got, as I was a teenager after I left home at 16, I remember getting a Mega Drive, and I played all the Sonic games. And then I think when the PS1 came out, I was playing Crash Bandicoot and those type of games. I love platform games. I love side scrollers, and even now, as a Switch owner, those are my games. Absolutely, I'm still playing, Mario versus Donkey Kong and Mario Wonder, and I think then the Play Dead games like Inside and Limbo are probably two of my most favorite games of the last 10 years.
Brilliant. And then onto your music. Being a left-handed guitarist, are you a Jimi Hendrix fan?
Well, I guess I ought to come clean as I'm a bass player rather than a guitarist.
Okay,
but yeah,
right.
I am a Hendrix fan. I'm talking about left-handed guitarists. Yeah, Hendrix is great in that sense because he played a guitar up the wrong way. So the tone controls were up by his forearm, which is a real pain when you're a lefty and you can't afford proper left-handed guitars. But they do sound great, even strung the other way with the way that the pickups are weighted against the strings. So big fan of Jimmy.
I got into Hendrix when I was about 16. I wanted a tattoo, and I thought, well, I'm listening to Jimi Hendrix at the moment, so I'm going to get a Jimi Hendrix tattoo. And I did. I got Hendrix on my shoulder, age 16, and my mum went ballistic. There we go. He's still on there. Want to mention as well, and I love your reference to the Pixar movies, and especially given that you worked at Disney as well. Just a little tip, if you ever get the opportunity, Steve Jobs' book and the period where he starts up Pixar. He got into Pixar when it was early on before progressing. But it's a fascinating read if you ever get the opportunity. Highly recommended. Love that.
Yeah, I mean, he had a huge impact when he came on the board at Disney as well. Around the same time as when Michael Eisner was on there as well, right? And Bob Iger. So as we were prior to Pixar being bought by Disney, I was working at Disney at the time, and they were making a lot of sequels, a lot of direct-to-video sequels. And legend has it that Steve Jobs came in and just went, well, why are we making these sort of second-rate movies? Like Apple wouldn't make a second-rate product, neither would Pixar make a second-rate film. And so they upped their game a lot, and they stopped making these direct-to-video sequels, which were really poor at the time. The sort of I can't think, were the Cinderella 2s and Lilo and Stitch 2s and things like that, which just weren't as good. And I think he really pulled he really upped their game and started to insist on higher standards in the sort of content they were making. And it really showed, because the generation of Disney then that I was involved in, beyond that, there were some amazing films. Their feature animation department really went from strength to strength. All the way up to the sort of Moana and Frozen, those sort of movies, which are brilliant.
Yeah. He does call Michael Eisner a bozo several times. It's pretty insightful.
I can't comment.
And out of all the films you've worked on and all the games you've worked on, there's one I need to ask you about because it's my little girl's favourite. But I saw that you made some contributions towards Beauty and the Beast, which is a firm favourite in our household. How was that?
Oh, it nearly broke me, actually. I think it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And you're talking about the live action version, right? The more recent one, are you? With Emma Watson?
Do you know what? Actually, to be fair to my little girl, like the first one she watched was the original. Actually, we got her watching that pretty young. Yeah, I'd say that's probably a favourite. To be fair, like the original Beauty.
The original one's great. I mean, it's very charming. But because, of course, what we're doing is in the dubbing world is you're replacing all of the dialogue and the singing with the localized language. I can't remember how many versions of the original I did. Probably only a few, because it had been out and it had been dubbed, 20 years prior to that. It came out in that period around when Disney had Lion King and Little Mermaid, and there was some really good Hunchback of Notre Dame. Was Michael Eisner's sort of golden period there. So yeah, I mean, when actually what happened was that the last couple of years that I was at Shepperton, we were doing Beauty and the Beast, the live action version with Emma Watson in, and it was in Dolby Atmos, so that the tech was very new, and we were you're talking about 40, 50 part chorus vocals in multiple languages with auto-tune singing parts and having to replace the leads with all of these different languages. And I remember doing that we were doing it for about 3 months, and it was probably the most complicated one because it had about 18 songs in it.
Yeah, there's a lot. It's probably why my little girl loves it. Yeah, Gaston, what a character.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. But they're just so they're so beautifully written. But every vocal, each person has a different line in a different place, and it's panned differently. And so you had to do all of that sort of automation and share it amongst all the other mixers, because how it would work was there would be like 6 or 7 rooms working, and you'd all take 2 or 3 languages each, and then it's being updated by the domestic team are updating their mix, so the music and the sound effects mix might be changing as you're doing it. So you're constantly, it's like spinning a load of, like juggling a load of different balls at the same time. And so, I think I can't hear that Gaston song or the bells, the main song in Reel 1 without getting some sort of PTSD. I'm sure. I still know all the words to it, despite being.
This is why I love getting guests on from different backgrounds, because there's so much that people just don't realise. You kind of allude to Beauty and the Beast there, and the fact that you had to 6-7 rooms doing 2 or 3 different languages and all the different elements attached to it. I think it's amazing. That's really insightful.
Yeah, it's an amazing achievement. Yeah,
amazing. On to Rev Rooms. I know a little bit about the business, having met yourself and Andy, but if you don't mind, tell us about Rev Rooms. What do you do? What makes you special? Because it's an amazing business in an amazing niche. So please tell us more about it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I mean, we're really proud of where we've got to in only 3.5 years. Andy and I had 2 names. We were going to call it either Rogue Rooms or Rev Rooms. And Rogue Rooms, we couldn't either pronounce it, and it kept misspelling it as Rouge Rooms, which sounds more awful than a game audio studio. So we settled on Rev Rooms. And the Dark Inca, one of Electric Square's artists, came up with the logo for free. So thanks, Steve, for that. Everything was done on the cheap because we I think we got like a $6,000 loan from the startup company just to buy enough kit to get started. So we were buying compressors and some speakers and a microphone and bits and bobs. It really was starting with nothing. And Rick Alexander came on board, and then we invited Gwen to get come in with us as well as one of the founders. So the 4 of us kicked off on Brexit Day during lockdown, which is about the most toughest period, where you really wonder what the hell you're doing. It's like, why are we just kicking off a business, on Brexit Day? So we didn't know how we were going to be able to trade with European or international countries. And we also can't be in the same room together. So it was really, really difficult. Connor Hogan was our first employee, and we were working on a couple of games for Electric Square. And really the whole ethos behind it was there are some amazing audio co-dev and outsource companies in games in the UK, sort of half a dozen top-notch companies. And we didn't want to be treading on their toes, or we didn't see ourselves as being exactly in the same realm as them. What we thought of was we'd sort of niche, position ourselves in this niche area of the more technical side of things. So we call it audio development, as opposed to just audio design. So we have audio coders who sort of design the overarching systems that run the audio in engine, in Unreal or Unity or the other big proprietary engines that our games use. And then we have technical audio designers who are the people that get knee deep in Wise and FMOD or in Unreal itself, maybe actually making the audio do what it's meant to do in the game, and audio designers that will create things. We built this up. There was four of us to start with, pretty much. We had 2 little rooms up at Seven Dials in Brighton that Paul James had kind of decided he didn't want to use anymore because he was doing my job at Pinewood. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, we'll take these rooms on and see if we can make a go of it. And pretty much through the lockdown, Andy and I were in there on our own because you could do that. We were both in completely separate rooms, and then what happened was we just got one job, and each job, so we bootstrapped the company. There wasn't like a huge amount of VC money. We'd literally just one job would come in. Someone would say, okay, we need someone for a year, an audio designer and a coder for a year. We'd go and hire them, get them started, get them spun up, and then they'd start the job. And then each job that came in, we built the company that way. So we were never leveraged to get, with a huge amount of money, which gave us this sort of frugality and penny counting kind of ethos as well, where we looked after the company really well. And GDC wasn't going on that first year because it was locked down, and so we didn't get to go and really talk about Rev Rooms to anybody for about a year and a quarter after we started. And so we've realised that from speaking to people in the industry as we were spinning up there, that people, this is a really good idea. The technical side of audio, the real sort of nuts and bolts of implementation, and also partnering that with coders as well, turned out to be the magic sauce, because audio designers in video games often get paired with a coder that might not be a natural audio specialist. There might be the junior coder, and they go, hey, look, you're going to do audio for 6 months on this project. And the person goes, oh, all right, okay, fair enough. And you might end up with not the best result from it. But what we've found is by offering our clients the audio code as part of the package with audio design, and we're all in-house, by the way, as well. Most of us, out of the 35 of us, are actually in Brighton in the studio. It means that you can sit desk side with someone and thrash out a solution to a problem or a system that needs to be made for vehicles or for ambulances or whatever it is you're making. And that's how we grew, really. And as each project came in, we would hire a few more people, take a bit more studio space, and we did that 5 times. We would take a little bit of space from the landlord, and when something came available, build a couple more audio rooms, hire a few more people, take a bit more space, build a couple more audio rooms, and then it just ended up being where it is right at the moment. So we have quite a bit of space in the same part of Clifton Mews in Brighton, centrally. And most of the people, we've relocated quite a few people as well. I think that was one of the things that was that made us quite ambitious. I think was to realise that we could, we signed up to the Home Office's visa scheme as well. So we were able to offer tier 2 visas for skilled workers. Right. So we could bring people in from other countries, take their visas on, or if they were already a foreign national working in the UK, another game studio that we could take on their visas as well. And there's a lot of work involved in that stuff that maybe other people doing this might just decide that's just a huge faff and they don't want to do it. But we really were ambitious about getting the right people, and so sort of getting their head round all of that sort of red tape and paperwork was something we were willing to spend the time on.
That's brilliant. And Gav, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I recall a conversation we had at GDC, and one thing that really struck me that I really, really liked that you guys do is you guys are more than willing to take good coders on, strong C++, maybe Unreal Engine or proprietary engine, and teach them the audio side of the required job, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. We see it as a sort of grow your own. There's 2 or 3 ways we've done this. The first is interns. So, we went out to How West in Belgium a couple of years ago and talked to the students there that do an undergrad course, which looks very much like audio code in its syllabus, and we brought a couple of students back with us, and we sorted out their visas, and then they finished off their internship. They graduated while they were with us, about 4 or 5 months into it, and then so that's how we've managed to sort of take generalist coders. Well, actually, those guys, they really were actually they were kind of doing a more audio specialist course actually. So and one of them still with us now. Actually, the other one decided to go off and do design instead, but he still had a great opportunity to have a look at how audio code was. And the other guys often are generalists. Yeah. So we've hired people that were C++ gameplay generalists, and Gwen whips them into shape and turns them into audio coders, we know enough about this stuff, and we have enough of long enough history now, enough experience within the studio to be able to mold people into what we need. The prerequisite is you've got to love sound, and so everybody that in Rev Rooms, including the coders, are either musicians or DJs or producers or something about it, something about their their private life, which is sort of steeped in sound as well. So you've got to love it. And that's why they sort of bring that that attitude into the work they do with us.
Oh, that's fantastic. Gav, I said to you kind of off air, like, I won't take up too much of your time. We'll probably be about 20 minutes. I've had you online for nearly half an hour. You've been amazing. Thank you so much. Before you go, I've got one question, which I always end with, if you don't mind. Is there anything that you're really looking forward to getting your hands on from a game perspective this year? Anything that's due for release that you can't wait to play?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Dave the Diver, and so I'm looking for the DLC in May, which brings Godzilla into the game. So yeah, I can't wait for that.
Fantastic! I'll keep an eye open for it. I know you're off to Croatia next week, aren't you? Reboot. Wishing you all the very best of luck with that. Again, thanks so much for your time. You've been a brilliant guest.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us, Mike.
I'll speak to you soon. Cheers, mate.